Welcome to the IFR Gate Podcast. I'm Zayd Haji, an author, research student, management consultant, and counselor. In today's episode, we're uncovering the hidden story of money, inflation, and why so many hardworking people feel financially stuck despite earning more than ever. Let's explore the system that shapes your financial future. Have you ever experienced the strange feeling of working harder than ever before, earning more than you did a few years ago, and yet somehow feeling less financially secure? On paper, your salary may have increased, your job title may have improved, and your professional experience may have grown. But when you look at your bank account at the end of the month, it feels as though nothing has truly changed. The rent is higher, groceries cost more, education has become expensive. Healthcare seems to demand a larger share of your income every year, and even simple pleasures that once felt affordable now require careful planning. If this feeling has crossed your mind, I want you to know that you are not imagining it. More importantly, I want you to understand that this experience is not merely the result of poor budgeting or personal financial mistakes. There is a much larger story unfolding around you, and unless you understand that story, you will continue blaming yourself for problems that were never entirely your fault to begin with. Today I want to tell you the story of money, not the version we memorized in economics textbooks, or the simplified explanations that reduce everything to supply and demand, but the deeper story that explains why millions of intelligent, hard-working people gradually lose purchasing power without even realizing it. This is not simply a discussion about currency or banking. It is a discussion about trust, psychology, power, incentives, and the invisible systems that quietly shape almost every financial decision you make. Once you understand this story, you may never look at your salary, your savings, or even your career in the same way again. One of the most dangerous forms of loss is not the loss that happens suddenly. It is the loss that happens so gradually that you begin accepting it as normal. Imagine a person standing in heavy rain. They immediately recognize that they are getting wet because the change is obvious. Now imagine someone walking through thick fog. They do not notice the moisture accumulating on their clothes because it happens slowly, almost invisibly. By the time they reach their destination, they are soaked without ever feeling the exact moment it happened. Financial decline often works in exactly the same way. People rarely wake up one morning and discover they have become poor. Instead, they slowly discover that their income buys less, their savings lose value, and the life they imagined becomes increasingly difficult to afford. The process is so gradual that they mistake a systemic problem for a personal failure. This misunderstanding creates one of the greatest psychological burdens carried by students, professionals, and middle-class families today. A student believes that getting one more degree will finally solve every financial problem. A young professional convinces himself that the next promotion will create stability. An entrepreneur believes that one successful business will permanently remove financial anxiety. Yet many people achieve these milestones and still feel trapped. Their income grows, but so do their expenses. Their responsibilities increase faster than their financial freedom. Their lifestyle expands just enough to keep them running on the same treadmill, only at a higher speed. They mistake movement for progress because no one taught them to distinguish between earning more money and preserving the value of that money. I find it fascinating that we spend nearly 2 decades studying mathematics, science, language, history, and technology, yet very few people ever receive a meaningful education about the thing that influences almost every decision in adult life. We are taught how to prepare for examinations, but rarely how to prepare for inflation. We learn how to calculate percentages, but not how purchasing power silently disappears over time. We understand how to earn a salary, but very few understand the system that determines what that salary will actually buy 5 or 10 years later. The absence of this knowledge creates a dangerous illusion. People assume that if they simply work harder, everything else will naturally fall into place. Sometimes it does. Increasingly, it does not. To understand why this happens, I want you to imagine a simple village. Every person contributes through meaningful work. Some build houses, others grow food, some teach children, while others protect the community. Instead of receiving money, each worker receives 5 yellow stones every day. These stones are accepted by everyone because they represent value. At the end of each day, a worker exchanges those 5 stones for enough food and supplies to support a family. The system is simple because the number of stones and the amount of goods remain balanced. Hard work translates directly into purchasing power. Now imagine that the leaders of this village face a problem. They need more workers, more projects, and more development, but they do not want to reduce anyone's wages because they fear public dissatisfaction. Instead of making difficult decisions, they choose an easier path. They simply create more yellow stones. Suddenly, workers begin receiving 6 stones instead of 5. At first, everyone celebrates because it appears as though they have become richer overnight. No additional work was required to produce these new stones, yet everyone seems to have more of them in their pockets. The village feels prosperous, conversations become optimistic, and people begin spending with greater confidence. Then something unexpected begins to happen. The number of food boxes, farming tools, and useful goods has not increased. Only the number of stones has grown. Sellers gradually realize that almost everyone now carries more stones than before, so prices begin rising. The same basket of food that once required 1 stone now costs 2. A tool that once required 5 stones now costs 8. Nothing physically changed about the products themselves. The only thing that changed was the measuring unit people used to exchange value. Workers eventually notice that despite receiving more stones, they are buying fewer necessities. They become frustrated, but most of their frustration is directed toward shopkeepers rather than toward the system that quietly altered the value of the stones themselves. This simple story captures one of the most misunderstood realities of modern economics. Inflation is often described as rising prices, but that definition only tells half the story. Rising prices are the visible symptom. The deeper issue is that the measuring stick used to evaluate value gradually becomes weaker. Imagine trying to build a house while someone secretly shortens your measuring tape every week. You may continue working with complete dedication, but the measurements themselves have changed. Eventually, your effort and your results no longer match. This is precisely why many hard-working people feel increasingly exhausted without experiencing proportional financial progress. What makes this process psychologically dangerous is that most people personalize what is actually systemic. When savings fail to grow, they assume they lack discipline. When expenses increase, they believe they are making poor financial choices. When their lifestyle stagnates despite years of hard work, they begin questioning their intelligence or ambition. While personal responsibility certainly matters, it is equally important to recognize that individuals do not operate in isolation. Every financial decision takes place inside a larger economic environment, and understanding that environment is not an excuse. It is a necessity. If you look closely at the lives of many professionals today, you will notice a common pattern. They have become incredibly efficient at producing value for organizations, but surprisingly ineffective at protecting value for themselves. They know how to negotiate salaries, complete projects, earn promotions, and satisfy performance reviews. Yet they rarely ask a more uncomfortable question. If the purchasing power of my money continues shrinking every year, am I actually moving forward? Or am I simply running faster to remain in the same place? That question changes everything because it shifts the conversation from income to value. This is why I believe financial education is no longer optional. It is no longer something reserved for investors, economists, or business owners. Every student preparing for a career, every employee planning for a family, every entrepreneur building a company, and every parent hoping to secure their children's future is already participating in this financial system, whether they understand it or not. Choosing not to learn about money does not remove you from the system. It simply leaves you vulnerable to forces you cannot recognize. I want to take you even deeper into this story because understanding inflation is only the beginning. The real transformation begins when we explore how money evolved from relationships to gold, from gold to paper, from paper to digital numbers, and why trust became the single foundation upon which the modern financial system now stands. Once you understand that journey, you will begin seeing money not as pieces of paper or numbers on a screen, but as one of the most powerful social agreements humanity has ever created. The moment we begin understanding that money is fundamentally built on trust rather than on paper, coins, or digital numbers, we start asking a far more important question. If trust is the real foundation of money, then who controls that trust? How is it maintained? And what happens when the rules governing that trust change? These are not abstract questions reserved for economists. They directly affect the student choosing a career, the professional negotiating a salary, the entrepreneur investing in growth, and the family trying to preserve wealth for future generations. Every financial decision you make exists inside a system that has evolved continuously for thousands of years, and unless you understand that evolution, you are likely to mistake the symptoms for the cause. Long before banks existed, money looked nothing like the currency we carry today. Human societies function through relationships, reputation, and mutual obligation. If I helped my neighbor build his home, I trusted that he would help me during harvest season. If a farmer shared grain with another family during a difficult year, everyone understood that the favor would eventually be returned. These exchanges were not measured by bank balances. They were measured by memory and trust. The system worked because communities were small, people knew each other personally, and reputation carried more weight than written contracts. Trust itself was the currency. The challenge appeared when societies grew larger. Trade expanded beyond villages, strangers began exchanging goods, and relationships were no longer sufficient to support commerce. You can trust someone you have known for 20 years, but how do you trust a merchant from another city whom you have never met? This problem demanded a new solution, and that solution was standardized money. Precious metals such as gold and silver became valuable not merely because they were rare, but because they possessed characteristics that made exchange practical. They were durable, divisible, recognizable, and difficult to counterfeit. For centuries, they became reliable stores of value because people trusted that these metals would remain valuable regardless of who possessed them. Yet every solution creates a new challenge. Carrying significant amounts of gold across long distances became dangerous. Merchants risked losing years of accumulated wealth to theft, conflict, or accidents. This practical problem gave birth to one of history's most influential financial innovations. Goldsmiths and secure vault keepers began offering storage services. Individuals deposited their gold and received paper receipts confirming ownership. Initially, those receipts were simply claims on physical gold. Whenever someone needed their wealth, they could exchange the receipt for the actual metal stored safely in the vault. Over time, something remarkable happened. People discovered that exchanging the paper receipt was far easier than retrieving the gold itself. Instead of collecting the metal, transporting it, and then depositing it again with another vault keeper, they simply transferred the receipt to the next person. The paper became more convenient than the asset it represented. Slowly, trust shifted away from the gold and toward the receipt. Without realizing it, society had taken one of the first major steps toward modern banking. Now imagine the perspective of the vault keeper. Day after day, people deposited gold but rarely returned to collect it. The gold remained safely stored while only the receipts circulated through the economy. Eventually, someone noticed an opportunity. If 100 receipts represented 100 pieces of gold, what would happen if 120 receipts were issued while only 100 pieces of gold actually existed? As long as everyone did not demand their gold simultaneously, the system appeared to function normally. More purchasing power entered circulation, even though no additional real wealth had been created. This marked one of the defining moments in financial history because it demonstrated a temptation that continues to exist in different forms today. Whenever the ability to create money becomes easier than the ability to create real goods and services, imbalance begins to emerge. The first recipients of newly created money often benefit because they purchase assets before prices fully adjust. By the time that additional money spreads throughout the broader economy, prices have already increased, leaving ordinary wage earners paying more for the same necessities. This explains why many people feel that they are constantly catching up but never truly getting ahead. History continued evolving until nations themselves adopted increasingly sophisticated monetary systems. Governments needed funds to build roads, maintain armies, educate citizens, develop infrastructure, and respond to emergencies. Borrowing became a practical tool for financing these responsibilities. In many cases, borrowing contributed to genuine national development. Roads connected markets, schools expanded opportunity, and infrastructure improved productivity. Debt itself was not inherently harmful. The challenge emerged when borrowing became politically easier than making difficult economic decisions. Future obligations often appeared less painful than present sacrifices, and every generation inherited responsibilities created by the previous one. The modern financial world accelerated dramatically after currencies gradually moved away from direct links to gold. Once money no longer required a fixed quantity of precious metal behind every note, governments and central banks gained significantly greater flexibility. During financial crises, recessions, pandemics, or wars, this flexibility allowed economies to avoid complete collapse by expanding liquidity and supporting financial institutions. That flexibility has undoubtedly prevented severe economic disasters on numerous occasions. At the same time, flexibility always carries responsibility. When money can be expanded more easily than productive capacity, inflation becomes a persistent possibility rather than a rare event. Today, most money never exists as physical cash. Your salary arrives as digital numbers on a banking application. You transfer funds with a fingerprint, purchase goods with a smartphone, and invest through platforms that never require you to touch physical currency. Modern money is essentially a record of obligations maintained through interconnected financial institutions. This system delivers remarkable convenience, speed, and global connectivity. At the same time, it reminds us that the value of money rests almost entirely upon collective confidence. We believe these numbers represent purchasing power because billions of other people believe the same thing. This brings us back to the question many people silently ask themselves: why does life seem more expensive even when my income increases? Part of the answer lies in inflation, but another part lies in expectations. Every generation tends to compare its present circumstances with the lifestyle it believed would naturally follow hard work. Previous generations often assumed that stable employment alone would provide housing, education, healthcare, retirement security, and upward mobility. Today's generation faces a far more competitive environment where technological disruption, global competition, rising asset prices, and changing labor markets constantly reshape economic reality. Hard work remains essential, but hard work without financial understanding often produces frustration instead of freedom. I believe one of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that earning money and building wealth are identical activities. They are not. Income reflects what you receive today. Wealth reflects what continues serving you tomorrow. A high salary without intelligent financial decisions can disappear as quickly as it arrives. Conversely, disciplined investing, continuous skill development, careful asset ownership, and long-term thinking gradually create resilience even when economic conditions become uncertain. The objective should never be to chase money blindly. The objective should be to increase your ability to create value while protecting the purchasing power of everything you earn. This is precisely why education must extend beyond classrooms. Degrees may open doors, but financial literacy determines how effectively you walk through them. Understanding inflation, investing, taxation, debt, entrepreneurship, technological change, and economic incentives is no longer specialized knowledge. It has become essential life knowledge. Every hour invested in understanding these concepts compounds over decades because informed decisions rarely produce immediate excitement, but they often produce extraordinary long-term outcomes. I also want to leave you with an important distinction. Understanding the financial system should not make you cynical. It should make you conscious. Cynicism convinces people that nothing can change, while awareness empowers them to make better decisions within existing realities. Complaining about the system without understanding it changes nothing. Understanding the system allows you to position yourself intelligently, recognize opportunities earlier, avoid common mistakes, and gradually create independence. That is a far more productive response than resentment. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from the entire history of money is this. Every financial system humanity has created has been built on confidence, cooperation, and shared belief. Systems evolve, currencies change, technologies advance, and institutions rise or fall. But individuals who continue learning, adapting, and creating genuine value consistently find ways to thrive. The rules may change, but curiosity, discipline, and thoughtful decision-making remain remarkably durable advantages. As we conclude today's conversation, I do not want you to leave with fear about inflation, governments, or banks. I want you to leave with a different relationship toward knowledge. Every paycheck you receive represents a portion of your life exchanged for value. Every hour you work can never be recovered. That means protecting the value of your earnings is ultimately about protecting the value of your time. Once you begin seeing money through that lens, financial education stops feeling optional and starts feeling deeply personal. The goal is not simply to earn more. The goal is to understand the game you are already playing. When you understand the rules, you stop reacting emotionally to every headline, every market movement, and every economic cycle. You begin making decisions with patience instead of panic, with clarity instead of confusion, and with intention instead of habit. That transformation is worth far more than any temporary burst of motivation because it changes not only how you manage your money, but how you understand your place in the modern world. Thank you for spending this time with me on the IFR Gate Podcast. If today's conversation challenged the way you think about money, then do not let it end here. Continue asking difficult questions. Read beyond headlines. Learn how economies function. Study the forces shaping your financial future. Most importantly, invest in your ability to think independently, because in a world where attention is constantly manipulated, independent thinking is becoming one of the rarest and most valuable assets anyone can possess. Thank you for listening to the IFR Gate Podcast. If this episode changed the way you think about money, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Zayd Haji, and until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep building a future based on understanding, not assumptions.